At 07:14 local time on June 7, 2025, the skies over Kursk Oblast erupted into flames as a Russian Su-35 fighter jet plummeted toward the earth. Within minutes, Ukrainian social media channels erupted with claims of a historic aerial victory, the first engagement in which a Ukrainian F-16 had taken out Russia's most advanced operational fighter. The story soon spread like wildfire. Ukraine's F-16 destroys Russian Su-35 in historic first, proclaimed one outlet. Even high-profile defense officials began citing the incident as proof that Western fighter donations were finally paying dividends. The German newspaper Bild even ran with specifics that made military aviation enthusiasts salivate. An F-16 had allegedly fired an AIM-120 AMRAAM missile after being vectored into the target by a Swedish surveillance aircraft operating hundreds of kilometers away. There's just one problem. What if everything you've heard about this aerial engagement is completely wrong? In the fog of war, first reports are almost always wrong, and in this case, the truth is far more complex, and perhaps even more impressive, than the widely circulated dogfight narrative. What actually brought down that Russian Su-35 that morning wasn't an American-made fighter jet at all, but something else entirely. The Ukrainian Air Force's own statement should have been the first clue. They confirmed the destruction of the Su-35 as a result of a successful operation in the Kursk direction, but notably didn't claim an air-to-air victory or mention F-16s at all. So if it wasn't an F-16, then what really brought down this jet? At 06:45 on that fateful morning, a Russian Su-35S pilot performed his pre-flight inspection at an airbase in western Russia. His twin Saturn AL-31F engines whined to life as ground crews disconnected external power. Within minutes, 35,000 pounds of the most advanced fighter technology in Russia's arsenal would thunder down the runway, confident in its superiority over anything the Ukrainians could throw at it. The pilot was tasked with a routine combat air patrol over the Kursk-Sumy border region. Russian ground forces had reported an increase in Ukrainian activity, and air cover was essential. The mission profile was straightforward: maintain station at 27,000 feet, roughly 16 kilometers inside Russian territory near Koronevo, and intercept any Ukrainian aircraft attempting to support ground operations. The Su-35S he was flying represents the pinnacle of Russian combat aviation. The Airbus-E passive electronically scanned array radar you see here in its nose can track 30 targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers. That's the same as standing in Moscow and seeing aircraft over St. Petersburg. The thrust vectoring engines enable maneuvers that defy physics, while the Kabini electronic warfare suite can supposedly render enemy missiles ineffective. But let's not get it twisted here. Despite this great tech, the F-16 is more than capable of turning an Su-35 into a heap of scrap metal. Here is why it didn't on this day. First, let's address the elephant in the cockpit. Ukraine's F-16 fleet is smaller than a high school football team. They received their first operational F-16s in August 2024, less than a year before this incident. Out of 85 aircraft promised by Western allies, only about 10 were operational by June 2025. Let that sink in. 10 jets to cover a country larger than Texas. The pilot situation is even worse. Ukrainian pilots spent their entire careers mastering Soviet-era MiG-29s and Su-27s. The F-16 isn't just different, it's philosophically opposite. Where Soviet doctrine emphasizes independent action and visual range combat, the F-16 is built for beyond visual range engagement and network-centric warfare. Military aviation experts typically cite 2 to 3 years as the minimum time needed for a pilot to become truly proficient in a new airframe. Ukrainian pilots had less than 1 by this time. And then there's the attrition rate that nobody wants to discuss. 3 F-16s were lost in under a year. One in August 2024 when Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Mess crashed during a mission, another in April 2025, and the most recent just weeks before our incident in May 2025. That's a 30% loss rate. In military aviation terms, that's not just bad, it's unsustainable unless more of those promised aircraft arrive sooner. Russian intelligence assessments that morning indicated minimal F-16 activity in the northern sector, and they were right. Ukraine's precious Western fighters were concentrated in the south and east. where they can maximize their defensive value. The primary mission? Intercepting cruise missiles and drones threatening critical infrastructure. That's their sweet spot, defensive operations where they can leverage their advanced radars and missiles while minimizing exposure to Russian fighters and surface-to-air systems. The idea of sending one of these irreplaceable assets on a penetration mission 16 to 50 kilometers inside Russian airspace isn't just risky, it's strategically reckless. It would be like using your last fire truck to deliver pizza while your city burns. But Russian confidence that morning went beyond simple numbers. Their pilot knew that the greater threat historically came from Ukraine's increasingly sophisticated ground-based air defense network, which had been steadily expanding its reach into Russian territory. Little did he know that this assessment, while accurate, would prove to be his undoing. Those sophisticated countermeasures he trusted, the ones that could supposedly defeat any Western missile, were about to face their greatest test. As our Su-35 pilot settled into his patrol pattern at 0700, he was unknowingly being watched by electronic eyes he couldn't see or detect. According to the narrative pushed by German media, a Swedish Saab 340 aircraft was orbiting somewhere over central Ukraine. Its powerful Iri radar painting every aircraft within a 450-kilometer radius. Now, Sweden did pledge 2 of these sophisticated surveillance aircraft to Ukraine in May 2024, as part of a $1.3 billion military aid package. The first one reportedly arrived in April 2025, just 2 months before our incident. These aren't just any surveillance planes. They're flying command centers packed with technology that would make a Silicon Valley startup jealous. The Saab 340 carries the PS-890 Iri active electronically scanned array radar. Unlike the rotating domes you see on American aircraft, this radar is housed in a distinctive balance beam mounted on top of the fuselage. It can detect and track both airborne and surface targets at ranges of 300 to 450 kilometers, depending on altitude and atmospheric conditions. The system is smart enough to filter out ground clutter, track low-flying cruise missiles, and even detect periscope-sized objects at sea. But here's where the technical reality collides with the media narrative. For the Saab 340 to vector an F-16 onto a target, they need to speak the same language, specifically Link 16, NATO's tactical data link system. This isn't just any communication system, it's the digital nervous system of modern warfare, allowing different platforms to share a common operational picture in real time. Think of Link 16 like a military WhatsApp group, where everyone can share their location, what they're seeing, and what they're targeting, all encrypted and jam-resistant. The Saab 340 could be posting, "Hey, Russian fighter at coordinates X heading Y, altitude Z," every millisecond, creating a perfect firing solution for any connected F-16. But here's the knockout punch to the F-16 theory. According to multiple sources, including Ukrainian military insiders, the Link 16 systems were reportedly removed from Ukrainian F-16s at the United States' request. The Americans were apparently concerned about this sensitive technology falling into Russian hands if an F-16 was shot down or captured. It's like giving someone a smartphone, but removing the SIM card and Wi-Fi chip. Sure, it can still take pictures, but good luck sharing them with anyone. Without Link 16, the communication between the Saab 340 and the F-16s would be reduced to voice radio calls. By the time that information is verbally transmitted, processed by the pilot, and acted upon, a supersonic fighter has moved several kilometers. In beyond visual range combat, that's an eternity. The timeline also raises questions. The first Saab 340 arrived in April 2025, and this incident occurred in early June. 2 months might seem like enough time, but integrating a new airborne early warning system into an air force that's never operated one before is like learning to conduct an orchestra when you've only ever played solo. There are procedures to develop, communication protocols to establish, and countless hours of training needed to make the system and people effective. Without that time, coordination, and connectivity, the idea of a seamless handoff from a Swedish surveillance aircraft to a Ukrainian F-16 becomes far less credible. Even assuming the Iri spotted the Su-35 and attempted to vector in a fighter, the lack of integrated data link would force the pilot to rely on voice calls, situational estimation, and manual radar lock-on, all in a high-speed engagement against a highly maneuverable 4th-generation jet operating deep in hostile territory. That's not a recipe for a clean victory, it's a recipe for chaos. And remember, these aren't just technological hurdles, they're strategic ones. Ukraine's F-16s are brand new to its inventory. Its pilots are recently trained, its support crews are still learning to maintain and arm the platform under wartime conditions, and its entire infrastructure is adapting to Western systems after decades of flying Soviet-built aircraft. Even NATO air forces spend years refining joint operations between AWACS and fighters. Expecting Ukraine to master that in 60 days, while under fire, isn't just optimistic, it's unrealistic. So that leads us to only one possible thing that could have shot this jet down. At 0713, this routine combat patrol became an international headline. The L-150 Pastel Radar Warning Receiver, a system as sophisticated as anything in the Western arsenal, suddenly erupted in electronic panic. The pilot's headset filled with the distinctive warbling tone that every combat aviator learns to fear. Someone, somewhere, had just pointed a fire control radar directly at his aircraft and was painting him for destruction. The aircraft responded instantly, 35,000 pounds of thrust-vectored fury rolling into a 7G barrel roll that would make any airshow crowd gasp. It wasn't pretty, but it didn't need to be. The goal was simple: break the radar lock before whatever was targeting him could launch. The Kabini electronic warfare pods mounted on his wingtips came alive, flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with false signals. Chaff dispensers fired, ejecting thousands of aluminum-coated glass fibers. Each strand acts as a tiny radar reflector, creating a bloom of false returns that can hide the real aircraft. In the thin air at 27,000 feet, the chaff cloud expanded rapidly, pulling up a metallic curtain between the Su-35 and whatever was hunting it. For a moment, it seemed to work. The radar warning receiver's angry buzz softened to an intermittent chirp. The threat radar had lost its lock, confused by the combination of electronic jamming and chaff. The pilot allowed himself a fraction of a second to feel relief. His sophisticated countermeasures, the pride of Russian electronic warfare development, had done their job. But at 7:14:08, exactly 26 seconds after the initial warning, the missile approach warning system screamed to life with a different, more urgent tone. This wasn't a radar trying to find him anymore. This was an active missile in flight, already past its boost phase, homing in on his aircraft with one goal in mind. The pilot yanked the stick back and rolled inverted, pointing the Su-35's nose at the ground in a desperate split-S maneuver. If he could dive fast enough and build enough speed, maybe he could force the missile to overshoot or run out of energy trying to match his trajectory. The thrust vectoring nozzles of his engine swiveled to their limits, allowing for instantaneous changes in directions that would rip the wings off a conventional fighter. Flares erupted from dispensers like Roman candles, each one burning hotter than the Su-35's engine exhausts. Against heat-seeking missiles, they could mean salvation, but the incoming weapon ignored them completely. Its radar seeker locked onto the aircraft's metal mass rather than its heat signature. The missile, now revealed by its performance to be a track-via-missile system, made final corrections to its trajectory. Unlike older surface-to-air missiles that rely on ground-based radars for guidance throughout their flight, this weapon had its own active radar seeker that became increasingly autonomous as it approached the target. The Kabini pods, so effective against predictable guidance systems, found themselves trying to jam something that was essentially thinking for itself. By 0714, impact was imminent. The proximity fuse detecting the Su-35's mass went off. The pilot, knowing this was it, reached for the ejection handles. In the fraction of a second before the warhead's effects reached the cockpit, explosive bolts fired, the canopy shattered, and the K-36DM ejection seat rocketed him clear of the doomed aircraft at 20 times the force of gravity. From 19,000 feet, tumbling through the morning sky over Kursk, the pilot watched his Su-35 transform into a heap of burning metal. The aircraft that had seemed invincible minutes before was now just expensive debris. As he was swinging in his parachute, the only thought that came across his mind was, what in the world just hit him? The weapon that transformed the Su-35 into scrap metal wasn't Ukrainian, Swedish, or some secret wonder weapon. It was most likely American, battle-tested, and hiding in plain sight. The MIM-104 Patriot surface-to-air missile system. First deployed to Ukraine in April 2023, the Patriot represents the apex of Western air defense technology. But calling it just an air defense system is like calling a smartphone just a calling device. The Patriot is a fully integrated, network-enabled warfare system that overturns traditional concepts of air superiority. Here's where things get interesting. The system utilizes what is called track via missile guidance in its latest PAC-3 variants. Unlike older surface-to-air missiles that need continuous radar guidance from the ground, the Patriot's interceptor becomes increasingly autonomous as it approaches its target. The missile has its own active radar seeker that activates in the terminal phase, making it essentially unjammable once it locks on. The numbers tell the story. Maximum engagement range up to 160 kilometers. Maximum altitude over 72,000 feet. Terminal velocity exceeding Mach 5. That's enough to give a target less than 2 seconds from detonation to impact at close range. The Su-35's thrust vectoring and super maneuverability mean nothing when the incoming missile is traveling faster than a rifle bullet and correcting its course 50 times per second. And this scenario is not just theoretical, it's already a done and dusted combat tactic. On January 14, 2024, a Ukrainian Patriot battery successfully engaged a Russian A-50 AWACS aircraft over the Sea of Azov, despite the A-50's sophisticated electronic countermeasures. In May 2023, Patriots operating from positions near the border brought down 2 Su-35s in Kursk Oblast. The Russian pilots probably felt as safe as our June 7th victim. After all, they were flying over their own territory, protected by their own air defenses. The Ukrainian Air Force's deliberately vague statement now makes perfect sense. By confirming the destruction but not the method, they protect operational details while letting speculation run wild. If Russian pilots want to believe Ukrainian F-16s are hunting them, that fear has its own value. But the reality is perhaps even more daunting. A networked system where sensors and shooters are separated by hundreds of kilometers, where the thing that sees you isn't the thing that destroys you. The media got their story wrong, but perhaps that's for the best. The narrative of F-16s hunting Russian fighters makes for better headlines, more exciting video thumbnails, more clicks, and more engagement. But the truth, that modern warfare has mostly evolved beyond dogfights into something more calculated, more networked, more inescapable, that's the real story here. Bye for now.